I wanted to start with your story.
Yeah.
How did Humble get created?
Yeah. I I I think I was in love with school. Like I love being in school. I think
Yeah.
every single school year, a new desk, new friend, new classroom, new adventure. I love that kind of reset.
Yeah.
Um,
And this is where in the world?
this is in Toronto. I was
Toronto.
born and raised in Toronto,
Okay.
Canada. Yeah. And then as an adult, after going to university and kind of realizing that adult life was going to become extremely repetitious, I went back to school and I got into teaching. So I was an elementary school teacher.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I taught the third grade, the fourth grade, the fifth grade for a year as well. So I taught for about 6 years.
Nice. How was that?
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
When you're with the kids, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
There's a whole other job before and after, but when you're in the room with the kids, it's a lot of fun.
Right.
And you learn a lot about yourself because you start to realize human development. Because we
Right.
forget that we were at one point almost empty vessels,
Sure.
and the amount of socializing that we've received,
Right.
and then to be in a classroom where you're completely in charge of the culture of this classroom, and you start to see the kids. You start to see you rub off on the kids
Right.
in terms of who you are. And I taught in the same neighborhood I went to school at. I didn't teach at the school I went to, but I taught in the same neighborhood. So the school was predominantly children of immigrants, first time coming in. In all the years I taught, I never had a white student.
Wow.
Yeah, Toronto's super multicultural.
I grew up the opposite, where everyone was white. I was always
Yeah.
the one Asian kid. Let me ask you this: how many years you teach?
I taught 6 years.
So 6 years of teaching. I
Yeah.
did 5 years of nonprofit residential with teenagers.
Oh,
But
lovely.
what were three of your takeaways from working with third and fourth graders?
It's always about
What
how
did they teach you?
What they taught me is they're capable of way more than you think.
Yeah.
It really is about how you package the information, and realizing that when you're active, when you're aware, how you speak to them with intention, with kindness, with encouragement. It's probably the most effective way to communicate with anybody. And you realize that, I can speak to everybody like they're an 8-year-old. It's not condescending. You're actually speaking to their inner child.
Right. Right.
So that really helped me become a much more effective communicator.
Ooh,
a
that's
much more
interesting.
effective writer. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I realized that I could take any idea. So whether I liked a really deep academic idea, all I had to do then was package it in a way that made it more understanding for everybody else. And the last one is probably accommodations, realizing that everybody requires a level of accommodation depending where they're at. So, when you teach, let's say the fourth grade, you have kids who are academically in the sixth grade, and you have kids
Right.
who are academically in the first grade.
Right.
And they're all in the same room. And in Toronto, they didn't hold kids back. So they were going to push kids through regardless, because for socialization purposes. But academically, you had to design programs to work for them.
Right.
And one of the philosophies was you take a C+ student, design an entire program to get them from C+ to B, and then use that program for everybody. And then you start to realize that, focusing on one will allow you to amplify that success. And that's really helped me realize that, that's how the best way to kind of work with individuals and tell, especially when telling my story and working with people, and also working with myself. It's, you're self-employed, you realize you have the worst boss you've ever had.
Yeah.
And you're self-employed, you realize you have the worst employee you've ever had.
Yeah.
And you'll say things and do things that you would never have done in any other work setting.
Sure.
And it doesn't lead to any results. It doesn't, being hard on yourself doesn't make you work harder.
Right. What's interesting is what you said, the second takeaway, your intention and how you treat kids and now with adults, addressing that inner child without being condescending. So what does that look like? So do you, when you're talking, whether it's intimate relationships or friendships, how do you tap into the third, fourth grader of that person without sounding condescending? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I think the big thing was, even when I was a teacher, I didn't
Yeah.
sound condescending to those kids.
Right, which
So-
is important.
which
You don't talk to kids like kids. That's like the worst.
You don't talk to kids like kids.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think, and if I ever spoke to my students like they're kids, like,
Yeah.
good morning,
Yeah, yeah.
boys and girls,
Yeah.
instantly they would be like, what's wrong?
Right.
Who is this guy?
Right.
Right. So I never did any of that. I spoke to them like I spoke to everybody
Yeah.
else. But I think the big thing, what you realize with kids, is you give kids the benefit of the doubt. you try to figure out their context. So, you have a young child and they're having a tantrum. You try to figure out the context. Why are they having this emotional outburst? And I don't know what age that just stops.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden you're not allowed to.
Yeah.
But an adult is having their emotional outburst for the exact same reasons. There's a context. They've hit a breaking point. They have certain tools. They don't know how to deal with it. So I think, and as I said, this is intentional. And when I'm in a good space, when I'm aware, and I think as a teacher, that's what I was doing for the day.
Yeah.
And that was my job. Obviously, when you're in a romantic relationship or when you're with your friendships, like that's only one element of your life. You have a long day at work, you come back, you don't want to deal with somebody's shit.
Yeah.
But that context is still there when you take time and reflect. So I think for me, always realizing that it's not black and white. There's always a lot of gray in between. And how do we discover that? And I think most often it comes from asking questions.
Yeah.
Being curious over judgmental.
Yeah.
And at least adults should be able to articulate that much more than kids. Because
Yeah.
kids will fill in that gap. Oh, he's hungry. Oh, he didn't get his nap today.
Right.
It's the same reason adults are jerks. They're hungry. They didn't get their nap today.
Yeah. So teaching for 6 years, and then what from there?
So once I began teaching, it was the first time, like that was adult life. First time I didn't have homework at the end of the day. First time I could figure out what to do with my time, and I had disposable income. And I got into, going into the city, looking for ways to meet girls and do all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
And I got into spoken word poetry.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I started doing like coffee shop poetry slams and all of that. And I grew up on hip hop. So I was always rapping and doing stuff like that. And to me, spoken word poetry was just rap without the music.
Right.
So I got into that circuit, and it was a small but active community in Toronto. And I used to do that weekly. And it was just a great icebreaker to meet people. It was a community in itself. Started meeting fellow artists. Started, kind of getting really into that world. And
that's where the poet comes.
That's
right?
where the poet comes, yeah. And so that kind of became my what do I do after work kind of thing. And it took a life of its own. It started growing. This was in the late 2000s.
Yeah.
And this is when YouTube became a thing. And
yeah.
Back then, if you posted something on YouTube, people actually saw it. And
right.
It was
no algorithms.
No algorithms. Yeah. Well, the algorithm was it exists.
Yeah.
Here, let everyone watch it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I started becoming a little bit of a, building a name locally at that point. And then kind of scratching my artistic itch, knowing it was always there since I was a child. I was always writing and trying to honor that passively, being like, okay, this is what I'll do for fun. This is my after work hobby. And it continued to grow. And I got more into music, started making music. And the students knew that, Mr. Singh makes songs and he swears on YouTube.
Yeah. It made you cooler.
It made me cooler. Yeah. And it was also like even the parents were aware of it. And I think it was because I looked like the community. I think that was a big thing where they got it and everything was great. And, take a couple sick days if I got a gig. I think the first gig I ever got where like they bought me a plane ticket was like Fresno, California.
Wow. Yeah.
I performed at some like conference, some youth conference over there, and like cool. And I took a sick day at work and flew to Fresno and had a whole experience. And then I started spending my summers with artists because I would meet these artists, but they were living the artist life. Like they were struggling artists.
You were a teacher / poet,
I was an artist with a salary.
Yeah.
And even in the summer, I had a salary. Even if I was, I'd be in like San Francisco staying with an artist who was renting out a room, and I was sleeping on the couch in his room. And, he would like literally be rapping outside the BART stations or trying to get onto shows and piecing that money together to pay his rent.
Right.
So I was kind of faking it where I was living the life with him, but I had direct deposit account coming in. So
did that make you feel fraudulent, or did you like that? You had safety, you had, quote unquote, a real job, and you got to hit flow states in poetry and work on your craft?
I think at that point, what it felt like I was living in the zoo, and I got to sneak out into the jungle every now and then. But I had to go back to the zoo. I had to go back.
Right.
And at that point, because I didn't know what I didn't know, the zoo just felt like a trap. I felt like, oh, I am in these cages, and these cages are keeping me from enjoying the freedoms.
Right.
And I'm meeting all these artists who have way less than me, but they feel like they're completely free. They're free to go where they want, live how they want, do what they want. And that summer, it was a final summer that I had done that. When I had gone back to the classroom, it just wasn't hitting. It wasn't my energy wasn't there, my enthusiasm wasn't there.
Yeah. You wanted to get out of the zoo.
I wanted so badly to get out of the zoo, and
you fell in love with the jungle.
Well, you fall in love with the small doses of the jungle.
Yeah.
You know, like you don't realize that these cages are keeping you in, but these cages are also keeping others out.
Yeah.
And you know, your zookeeper is giving you a meal every 2 weeks,
right?
And everything is taken care of,
right?
And you're looking at a romanticized version because you spent 2 months with a guy who, even himself, you know, even as he's a struggling artist, there's still a family that could take care of him if worst things come to, you know, worst case scenario. But yeah, I was working in music, and then somebody presented me with an opportunity to do some songwriting, and it was supposed to be a really lucrative deal, which was more than I made as a teacher.
Right.
And without any due diligence, without any responsibility, I left the job and dove headfirst into it. And then that was my first real taste of the jungle.
Oh,
yeah.
And it wasn't what you expected.
It was not at all, because it was completely fraudulent. It ended
up
up making me unemployed and broke.
You know, it's interesting, and I think many people listening can relate to, I mean, what you're talking about is just life, right? I have my version of this too. But it was almost like that shiny thing pulled you out, because if you had known it was fraudulent, you would have never left, right? So that got you out of the zoo, and then you realize, oh, this is not real, but now you're out. And so now it's sink or swim for you.
It's sink or swim, and you know, it's been over a decade since, you know, and that was a very tough time.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was no longer a guy doing art as a hobby. I was trying to figure it out. And at the same time, I thought the way you made art was you make some dope art, and then like Puff Daddy discovers you, throws a bag of money on your head, and it's just happily ever after.
Yeah. Then the Ferraris, and
then the Ferraris, all that good stuff, right? And this is even when social media was still in its adolescence, so it wasn't even something that was guiding my decisions. But then, you know, it became quick. Within probably a year of waiting for these deals to come through and them not coming through, you start to realize, like, oh, I've never actually existed in a competitive environment before, because I was a teacher. My colleagues weren't competing with me. Everybody's paid on their seniority. Like, it doesn't matter what I do. I don't get paid on my performance. I get paid on how long I'm there. And everyone's priorities was the kids. So everyone, you know, if I showed up late after lunch, another teacher would have got my class sorted and settled, because their safety is paramount.
Sure.
Versus making me look bad.
Right.
And then you realize in the jungle, you know, somebody recognizes your talent very early. They want to see how they can benefit off of that. So I got that crash course very quickly.
Yeah.
That yes, I was not free in the jungle, but now I had no skills, and I was, you know, I pretty much had a bubble burst, and I was choking on the fresh air. And one of the things that came from that was I thought, you know, making music and creating art was going to be my salvation out, but I wasn't able to do that by myself. I didn't know how to record. I didn't know how to make music or produce. I didn't know how to shoot videos. I was working with people, but they were all part-time too.
Right.
Like the guy recording me, he was a sound engineer for like commercials, and the guy shooting my music videos was a wedding photographer. So they all had real lives. And, you know, and now I was trying to do this every day, and they weren't in a position to do it. And then a friend said, you know, what can you do all by yourself? You know, if you don't know how to record, you don't know how to do all of this, what can you do by yourself? And at that point, I said, I can write.
Right, yeah.
That's all I can do is write.
Yeah.
So they said, write every day. So
is that where Humboldt entered? So there was the poet, there was spoken word, there was music, there was hip hop, and then you realize, okay, there's something I need to do that I can do with myself and not depend on other people, and that was writing, right? And then is that kind of where Humble the Poet was born?
Well, Humble the Poet was born from the spoken word, and from the hip hop. So like I have, you know, you can look up. I have music on Spotify now under Humble the Poet.
Yeah.
What that did was that was the birth. That moment was the birth of the author. And what I didn't realize at that time was that, you know, I was talking about important things even in my music, but black and white text is just way more accessible. Going back to accessibility and how people can consume information. So all I did was commit to writing every day on Facebook.
Why did you start writing self-betterment? Is that just what you naturally gravitated toward?
I think I gravitated towards learning new things.
Yeah.
And I think where I was at that time was I was in a dark place.
Right.
And I've learned this recently from the therapist that I see, that if somebody couldn't afford a therapist, their best option is to write every day. And
journal
every day.
It's a form of processing.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what I was doing. I wasn't doing it thinking I was processing. Right. I was saying I need to, if you don't create, you don't exist.
Yeah.
And this friend challenged me to do something that was in my control, which was write. So I'm like, I'm just going to write every day on Facebook. And what I had been doing was collecting photos of just random things for inspiration. I have a collection now on Instagram too, just random things that inspire me. I used to just go into that folder, pick a picture,
and then write
about it. And the pictures were random. Like, there's a picture of a real photograph of a monkey holding a baby tiger feeding it a baby bottle.
Right.
And then I would just start writing about service, and I'm writing to myself, and I'm just changing the pronouns. So instead of saying me, I would say we. Instead of saying I would say we. We. And once I started doing that daily, and again, this is like early. This might be 2011, 2012.
Yeah.
Pre algorithms on Facebook too.
Yeah. Blogs were exploding at that time.
Blogs were exploding, and I remember the first question when I committed to writing every day was, what if you run out of things to write? I remember I found a guy who was daily blogging, and in his FAQ, that was a question. What happens if you run out of things to write? And his answer was, write every day and see if you run out of things to write. Like, that's it. Because if you actually write every day, you'll never run out of things to write. And I didn't. I wrote every day, and then my audience started to grow much quicker.
Where were you the most active? Facebook?
At this point, there only was Facebook.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're talking 2011.
Yeah.
So,
because that's about when I started writing after my broken heart, and I called myself the Angry Therapist. But I was active on Tumblr. That's where I was on.
It's funny. So my stuff went on Tumblr as well. And my roommate at the time, he had a very active Tumblr, which was just naked women. So that's how I always view Tumblr as much more photography. I think I put my stuff on Tumblr. It's interesting. I just reconnected with I just connected with the dude who bought Tumblr, and they're making a resurgence.
Really? Is it coming back?
Yeah. Or it is back. They own WordPress. Well, we can talk about that. He actually, I met him a few months back, and he said, "Listen, if you get active on there, we'll make it worth your while."
Oh, so nice.
Something to think about.
But yeah, we were parallel in that.
Yeah.
We I didn't have anything. I didn't. The only thing I had was time.
Yep.
And I had my thoughts. I was a screenwriter, and so I connected to myself again, but it came in the format of a blog, and I was starting to become a therapist, and so I started talking about, which we'll get into now, is love and relationships and all that. So we were both in 2010 punching keys,
punching keys to get ourselves out of the dark places.
Yeah, you in Canada, me in LA.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you've written many books. This is your latest book. It's called How to Be Loved, and so the background is someone that I know in the sense that we've CrossFitted together.
Oh wow!
And then he was doing his art, and then now this is like on walls everywhere.
Yes,
right.
Ruben Rojas,
how did you connect with that?
I connected with him through Lewis. It was when I first.
Lewis. because he has it on his wall.
Yeah. So so pretty much what happens is, when I moved out here a year and a half ago, and I've been coming out here regularly since like 2015.
Yeah.
So Lewis was a friend, and we went on a hike, and I kind of complained that I'm only meeting entertainers. I'm not meeting artists. And then he goes, here, because I know some artists. You need to meet my buddy Ruben. That's an artist. Yeah.
Rojas.
Ruben Rojas. You need to meet him.
Yeah.
And then we sat there and connected. And again, that was more just for me to have an artist friend. And then I mentioned to him that I'm writing a book about love. And then obviously, that's his entire universe is love. And it was later that my agent said, he goes, you should ask him to do your book cover.
Nice.
And shout outs to Hay House, because they made it such an easy process where they reached out to him. They spoke about the business side. That was all sorted. Then me and him just spoke creativity.
Oh, nice.
So it was a much better situation. And because when we had met up originally, all we talked about was this kind of idea about creating art, and how often there's art that feeds your soul and there's art that feeds your bills, and they're generally two different things. And how when artists work with artists, it's a little bit more of a fun experience.
Yeah, it's collaborative. It's also we feed into each other. You could put business aside and just lean into your right brain. This is very LA in that we don't really know each other, didn't grow up together.
Yeah.
But then it's like the guy that did the cover of your book, I also have met, and there's a because in LA it's like there's always a couple degrees of separation, and you know someone who knows someone. Oh yeah, and I know that person.
And that's the thing with him too. Like he's in great shape. He's in ridiculous.
Yeah, he was. Shape. I mean, he would roll up in his Escalade, and we would go work out. And I was obsessed with CrossFit at the time. Yeah. And yeah, he was shredded and a beast, as we called it back in the day. And I remember him. And he's been very successful. I love that he poured his gifts into painting and street art and the wall, and now it's everywhere. So.
He's got like statues outside a few NFL stadiums now.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so he's got these. I think it's a 50-foot statue outside of a hospital in North Carolina.
Oh, that's amazing.
So yeah, he's just he's literally spreading love.
Yeah, exactly.
He's literally spreading love, and I think it's just really dope that he's done it. And and he recently just designed a bottle of tequila.
Jeez,
that's great. Really cool stuff.
I love it. You're also spreading love. This book has 61, I would say, concepts. I would say, I do a lot of things kind of in a shot glass, and I kind of feel like you do too, in that potent, a couple pages, no fluff, poetic, right? And so I took a bunch, and I thought we could get into it. My audience, it's relationships, love, a lot of that stuff that they're thirsty for. And so I have a couple of my favorite, and I wanted to kind of do a deeper dive on it, if you will. One of yours is how to make anyone fall in love with you, right? Yeah. So what caused you to create that, and what do you mean by that? Meaning, how do you make anyone fall in love with you? Which is the what, $10,000 question, $1 million question.
Yeah. I mean, if you read two more lines into that, you realize it's a joke title. Right. Yeah, it's completely a joke title. Yeah. And even the way I titled the book, How to Be Loved, it's realizing it was inspired by a friend, Matthew Hussey. What he was telling me, he goes, if I made a video about how to love yourself, I would title it Why He Won't Text Back. Right. Because the title is what grabs you. The title is what grabs you, and you're meeting people where they're at. Yeah. And the message is for people to strengthen their relationship with themselves. Right. Which in fact will probably draw more people to you. But people want to hear, how do I make it? Yeah, when you read How to Have a Better Relationship with Yourself, you're like, pass. Yeah, pass. Why won't he text me back? Oh, I want to know. I want to know, or how to get all the chicks, or how to get all the guys, how to make, So I think from that's kind of, it was, there's a lot of comedy in this book, but it was that idea. But I think definitely the big idea behind that is, your relationship with yourself determines your relationship with everybody else. Sure. And, that determines your boundaries. That determines what you find attractive. That determines, how much you prioritize being likable over even realizing love with somebody else. It also determines your definitions of love and what it means and the roles that you want to play with that. So how you make anyone fall in love with you, is basically you do that by you falling in love with you, right? Starting with you, focusing on you, working on you is what actually attracts people to you, instead of making someone, trying to convince someone to sell someone on you, which of course is not sustainable and won't last. But and I agree with you. Your relationship with yourself, as you build that, people fall in love with that. Yeah, because it's like we're outsourcing the antidote to our loneliness. And it's not somebody else is not the antidote to loneliness. Right. Loneliness is the punishment for being alone. Solitude is the reward for being alone. So loneliness is not being alone. You can feel lonely in a room full of people. Well, what's worse than feeling lonely when you're single is feeling alone in relationships. Yeah. I mean, we all feel it's normal to experience loneliness. It's a feeling. But I'm saying like a consistent, if you're constantly feeling alone in your relationship, to me, that's worse than feeling alone when you're single. Yeah. And that feeling of loneliness is internal. So you can't have an external solution to that. It has to get addressed on the internal side. Yeah. And I think, I love the Peter Crone idea of saying, you don't say I love you, say you show me where love is. So when we recognize ourselves as a source of love and we view love as the verb more than the noun, and we share love with people, that in itself is going to create a pathway between us and other people for love to flow. Yeah. So by default, and I think what I'm realizing, especially through a lot of these conversations that I'm having now with people, is everybody has quality relationships and love in their life. They're generally not romantic, And they generally think the romantic relationships have to be different in some capacity. So, love for a sibling, love for a parent, love for a friend doesn't require as much expectations, doesn't require as much.
Why is that? Why do we put so much weight on romantic love and constrictions? And because, some people are great friends, but then when it comes to their relationships, they're a fucking mess, Why is that? Because it is very different in that friendships tend to be less pressured, right? And also friendships aren't about the promise. And I think this is one of the reasons when you love someone romantically, you want the promise. When you're friends with someone, it's organic and you don't care about how long you're going to be friends with someone. You care about what's in common. You care about the here and now. You care about the energy and the banter. And you care about all that too in romantic relationships. But I think a lot of times when you focus on promise, it strips away friendship and a lot of foundational stuff.
I think it's that 1000%. And going back to teaching, it's also this idea that a lot of the things that we have accomplished or we have now on our tool belt were meticulously force-fed to us. Your ability to read this book came from a 10-year program designed by educators that started with, all right, let's teach them the letters. Let's teach them the sound of the letters. Let's put 2 letters, put 3 letters together. We'll do this slowly. So maybe by the time they're 13, they can read Harry Potter, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you want to learn a new skill, let's say it's a piano or something like that, and you have to regulate yourself now on a 10-year journey, it's going to be way more difficult.
Yeah.
So a lot of the friendships we have happened when we were kids, happened when it was proximity. You're sitting beside me. You're now my best friend. And I know you. And then I move and forget about you and go hang out with somebody else. And it's a lot easier because I do think the pressures of adults becoming friends with each other are still pretty high as well.
Of course.
And I think what's happening is love actually isn't the priority. And that's why it's so difficult because love is to accept, So like you think about someone you genuinely love right now, all their imperfections. You could write a book about their imperfections. None of that disqualifies them from your love. If anything, it shows that they're vulnerable and that makes you care about them more because vulnerability is such an important ingredient to connection. What I think is happening, especially when people think about love, is they're really talking about this process of courting and dating. And I can say, well, being perfect and beautiful doesn't matter in love, but appearing perfect and beautiful may be important to get a second date.
Right.
A second date isn't love.
Yeah.
It's a second date.
Yeah.
And I've written in here, I don't care who pays. I don't care who texts. I don't care. That's not what love is. That's this courting process. That's this journey. Sure. And there are people who, they have, their high school sweetheart and they never had to play those games. And, they organically grew and have a strong foundation of multiple first experiences together. They grew up together and that's what they know. And, they end up lasting, in a world.
Very few, by the way, high school sweethearts still together. But
very few couples are together at this point. We're at 56% divorce rate, right? So I think there's that recognition of realizing that, look, a lot of things that you're doing is you're chasing things that you think are love. Admiration, attention, affection, adoration, worship, power, clout, money, all success, all this stuff is not love. And if, being liked, that's not love. All of these things aren't there. And we feel like we have to be or do something to earn those, which you probably do. And by default, because you have to earn them, that doesn't make it love. Yeah. Love isn't something you have to earn or find. Love is what's already there. Love just requires you to clear out all the mess that's in the way, all the clutter. Clean out the clutter and the love can flow.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think when it comes to when you say earned, I think trust needs to be earned. I think relationships are built. But in the way that you're describing love, it's more of it's almost more of like a living, breathing thing. It's something greater. It doesn't hang on some kind of exchange. Almost.
Well, and we know it doesn't. And again, I don't want it to become mega, cosmic and super highly spiritual. Yeah. I'm gonna say love is the default. Like love is what exists when we live in a world beyond duality. When we stop thinking things are black and white. That's the only place that love can exist. And love isn't transactional if you're a parent. You have a child. Your child, for the first couple of years, will do nothing back.
Yeah.
other than exist and,
Yeah.
and defecate all over
Yeah.
you, right? So
Right.
it doesn't require history. It doesn't require establishing trust.
Yeah.
I think pathways of love between two adults, trust is a part of that process. As I said, it doesn't. I don't think it requires all of these things. I think the courting process and meeting new people, especially as adults, with all of our insecurities, all of our coping mechanisms, all of our fears around getting hurt, has created this culture of, let's put on a mask, let's put our best foot forward, and then hopefully slowly reveal who we truly are. And I think there's a more healthy approach to this, which is stop thinking vulnerability is 0 or 100. I can be vulnerable with you right now, and it doesn't have to be TMI. It doesn't have to scare you away. And I learned that through therapy. I learned have 2 stories of vulnerability in your pocket that you could tell a stranger for the first time, and it would not scare them away. When I have stories about losing my first dog and it breaking my heart, and getting a new puppy, and originally saying no, and then after a few shots of tequila being like, no, I need this puppy. Right. And then she flew with me here from Toronto, and now she lives a beautiful LA pretty girl life. And at the same time, the first time I took her to a vet after COVID was the first time I was allowed in a vet's office. The first thing I saw was the metal table, which reminded me of the first time I put my last dog to sleep, and I had an emotional reaction to that.
Right.
And I wasn't expecting it. And it helped me realize I have emotional triggers and traumas that I never processed, didn't even know existed.
Yeah, it was stored.
Yeah, they were stored. And so now, having this new puppy who's young, energetic, and healthy, knowing that if everything plays out properly, I'm still going to outlive her, is requiring me to reframe my relationship with death, reframe my relationship with my attachment to her and how I view it. That's a vulnerable story.
Yeah.
It's not a vulnerable story that's going to scare you away. It's not a vulnerable story that makes me think that you're going to use that again. Like, the quality of person you'd have to be to use that against me, to hurt me, wouldn't make me want to be around you anyways.
Right.
I think people have to realize that that's more important than rhyming off your resume to impress somebody. Let them know who you are.
Sure. Yeah.
And that just requires more self-reflection and building that vulnerability with ourselves.
No, I agree with you. I mean, this whole thing for me started by showing who I was on Tumblr. Didn't know anyone would read it, and then that's kind of been, and especially as a therapist, where you're not really supposed to talk about you, and so I secretly did pull the curtain back, and then I realized, and I think it's happening now, where people are more interested in who you are than what you do or the letters after your name.
Yeah,
you say love is a path, not a destination.
Yeah.
Explain.
I'm a big believer in the journey, not the destination, and viewing love as a verb. So viewing love isn't the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Love is the rainbow. It's the journey. It's who you're becoming on the journey. It's the work that you're doing. And I think so often people are working towards love when love is the work.
Why are relationships so hard? I think everyone agrees relationships are hard if you've had one, Why do you think they're so hard?
I think a lot of them are based off of a template that was created by people thousands of years ago and has been updated.
Yeah. Grandparents, great-grandparents. It's passed down from, you mean generation to generation?
Passed down from generation, but also passed down from a life that doesn't exist anymore. I think for 10,000 years, 20,000 years, there were roles being played by everybody for small communities. And we were in much smaller communities, villages. My parents grew up in those villages. So, for me, it's a generation away. For some people, it's 200 years away. And I think it became a well-oiled machine, and the roles that everybody played and the expectations and how it worked. And then nobody decided to update these policies when we started living in these larger metropolitan areas. Nobody updated the policy when we created Instagram and girls on Instagram with filters, and nobody created the policy when everybody is a dopamine addict, completely afraid of FOMO,
Right.
Things need to get updated. And I think what's happening is things aren't updated. And I think we also don't realize that when people refer to society, society pressures this, society pressures that. We have to go deeper and try to figure out what is society, who is society. And I think a simple answer is, at least in this part in the world, society's main goal is to get you to buy stuff, to keep the engine going,
right?
Which means the stories they tell you is to encourage you to buy stuff, which means the dreams they sell you will always encourage you to buy stuff. And I think that's a really important thing to understand, because they're going to make you more in love with the wedding than they are the marriage.
Right. So what would be the update when it comes to love, or at least for you, what is the new definition of love and relationships that is on to you today that isn't from our parents or grandparents and all that? What does that look like?
I think self-awareness. Probably, if I had the magic power to shove a religion down everyone's throat, it would be the religion of self-awareness.
What's your definition of self-awareness?
Being aware of your patterns and being aware of the influences of your patterns is not nature versus nurture. To me, it's nature and nurture working together. And doing the work to discover how your nature and how your nurture have worked together to make you the person that you are. Recognizing as many of your emotional triggers as possible and being able to articulate them to somebody else, taking ownership over them, realizing it's nobody else's job to tiptoe around you and your individual triggers.
Ownership is huge.
Ownership is very huge. Understanding that power only exists when we take responsibility. So realizing that, a fast food version of self-connection is self-pity. It's a really quick way to feel like you're connecting to yourself. You're like, no one knows what I'm going through except for me, but there's no power in self-pity.
Right.
So
victim mode.
Right.
Which is powerless, not power filled.
Yeah. And I'm not saying taking responsibility means taking blame. Taking responsibility is asking yourself, where is my power? And the analogy I like to use is if I'm driving my car and I did nothing wrong and somebody rear ends me, it's still my responsibility now to do the insurance, to go to the auto body shop, to get everything done.
Right.
It wasn't my fault, but it's still my responsibility. And I think for a lot of us, we have to recognize that how often there are people selling us the idea that, no, we're just victims. It's not our fault. Someone else should fix this for us. And the people that are doing that are doing it to consolidate power and influence themselves.
So how does so what we're talking about now, how does that show up in relationships? Meaning, so like you're just saying with the car, if I got blindsided, yes, it wasn't my fault, but it's my responsibility to go get my car fixed and go to work tomorrow or whatever it is. In relationships, how does that show up? How does in relationships do you take the power back? Partly ownership, but what does that look like?
So the ownership is becoming what you seek, right? So many of us, I think what's happening, especially with this generation, is starting to recognize the gaps in our upbringing. Realize we were all raised by imperfect human beings, but that's not where it stops. So I'm not a victim of my parents because they messed up in certain elements of raising me. I'm an adult now. I can fill in those gaps. And I'm not a victim of those circumstances anymore because I have the ability to fill in those gaps. I have the ability to be my own best friend. Whatever I'm lacking or whatever I didn't get from the friends around me. And again, you don't get to feel sorry for yourself in that capacity. You don't get to say, well, I'm here for my friends and my friends are never here for me. It's more about acknowledging on that context that, okay, I can be here for myself. I can fill in the gaps in my upbringing. My parents didn't. I have a friend who just recently took himself to the dollar store and gave his inner child a $20 shopping spree.
Nice. As an exercise? It was like go wild with the 20?
Yeah. He goes, go wild. Yeah. I don't even think he set a limit.
Yeah.
I think he literally just said go wild. And they ended up at $20 of Cheetos and chocolate bars. And he's a healthy dude who doesn't normally eat like that.
Yeah.
But he explained that just started this journey of this inner dialogue where he's walking out of the store eating this candy and still having more conversation with his inner child and helping him realize how many survival and coping mechanisms that he still carries because he grew up in the streets that no longer apply. He doesn't live in a dangerous neighborhood anymore. He doesn't have to walk with his head on a swivel. He doesn't have to walk super fast. He doesn't have to size up everybody that's approaching him. And that conversation began with this Cheetos chocolate bar. And so he's filled that in because he didn't have that growing up. His mother had addiction issues and they were living on the streets. So filling in that gaps. I think also, challenging our influences. So again, our nurture comes from media. Healthy relationships are peaceful. Healthy relationships will not make exciting television.
Yeah.
Your Ross and Rachel, your Bobby and Whitney, your cat and mouse relationships.
Pamela Anderson, Tommy Lee.
Yeah.
The 90s coming back.
All of them are here for entertainment. They're not models of relationships. So we have to stop chasing sparks. We have to stop chasing better halves. Yeah. You have to stop chasing someone who completes us. You are a complete individual. If anything, you want to chase something, chase a second pillar. Yeah. You're a pillar, they're a pillar, and now you're both two pillars that can hold up something greater than the sum of you,
Yeah.
which is a family, which is a business, which is a community, which is a village. View yourself as that. Learn the difference between interdependent and codependent. You know, the only codependent relationship that's probably acceptable is you and your dog.
Dog?
Yeah.
Oh.
Because they are completely like
dependent on you.
Yeah, I can't live without you. You are my everything, and I will make you feel like you matter, and that's it. Which is cool and cute. You never have to set them
for
off
many,
into the
that's
world.
you and your child, the codependent. You know?
And that's extremely unhealthy.
Yeah.
You know, and it's been really interesting talking to women who say, you know, they help me define what a mama's boy is, and a mama's boy is somebody who is a man who received unconditional love from a woman and now doesn't know how to live up to standards.
Sure.
And
Because the enmeshment with mom or mom and child, they were so codependent that he didn't have a sense of his own self, right?
Yeah.
So as an adult,
and there was no constructive feedback.
Yeah.
There was nothing to help him improve, and now all of a sudden he's meeting women who are like, you have to earn my attention, my love, my affection, or whatever. And again, that's not love, but it's still earning that second date or whatever it means.
Yeah.
And it catches them off guard because they're not used to that. So I think, you know, this is where a lot of the stuff starts to come into play. We're starting to recognize all of these things are within our power. We're not victims of it. Even if we didn't come out of the box with all these tools, we're in a position now where we can intentionally choose these things. And I think it was Joe Dispenza said, you know, articulate who your dream partner is and become them. You know,
become them instead of find them.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And I think it's also another concept I've recently learned, and I've learned this through therapy, is this kind of concept of like, you know, everyone requires special accommodations, and if you're not used to that special accommodation, you call it a red flag. And I think that's been really interesting because you start to, and it goes back to, we choose what's familiar over what's healthy. Yeah. So, you know, if I snore and I meet a girl who, you know, grew up with a dad who snores and snoring is a comfort sound to her, then we're great.
Right.
Versus the girl who didn't grow up with that, who's just like, I'm going to murder you. I can't sleep in the bed with you. You're too loud. And you start to realize like everybody has their own unique individual experiences. And I think the more awareness that we have for that, we can figure that out. And also realizing that a lot of our personality, a lot of our definitions of love, and our models for love came in our upbringing. And
what was around us, what we saw.
And we were experiencing them with so many limited filters on because our brains were developing. Yeah. You know, if you're 8 years old and, you know, dad comes home from work and you drew him a picture and you show him, but, you know, he kind of brushes you off. You know, that you internalize that. As adults, we may have context that he might be having a horrible day at work. Yeah. Or he might have came back from the bar, or we didn't even know what, had nothing to do with you. But the 8-year-old's going to internalize that. Yeah. And so many of us now find ourselves attracted to people who make us have to earn it. We have to earn their love. Mm-hmm. And somebody who makes it too easy kind of feels gross. Oh, that person texted me back in a timely fashion. Something must be wrong with them. Yeah. Because why would they make it so easy for someone like me? And I think we have to abandon this languaging around worthiness and enoughness for love. I don't think you can measure a human being in terms of them being enough or worthy. Mm-hmm. I don't even want to tell somebody you're worthy of love. Love doesn't have a qualification, a qualifying factor. Yeah. It exists, and, you know, either your doors are closed to it or your doors are open to it, and that's internal work to make that happen. And those doors are your insecurities. Those doors are your limiting beliefs. Those doors are the traditional beliefs that we have, and just being a little bit more critical. So why do I believe this? Oh, I watched a gang of Disney movies, or I watched a gang of porn, or I watched a rom-com, and I watched all this stuff play out. But this isn't real life. Real life is a whole different thing. Yeah. And those conversations are, I think, you know, they'll come through journaling. I think they'll come through other methods of being more intimate and vulnerable with yourself. I think prayer is a great example, irrespective of your beliefs. Mm-hmm. Prayer is a great place for you to articulate what you're authentically grateful for and what you authentically want. And no one's there to check out and judge your answers. Yeah. I have a story in here about a girl who, you know, cancels a date on me, and I ask her if she ever gets lonely, and she says, yeah. And I'm thinking this will be a way to get her back. And I go, so what are you going to do when you're lonely? She goes, I dance. Mm. She goes, I close my blinds and I dance. Yeah. And she goes, I've become closer with my body and more aware of my body. And I build a deeper relationship with myself.
Sure.
You know, it's intimacy and vulnerability. That can happen with ourselves. And
Yeah.
activities like self-havening, hugging yourself, you know, being more vulnerable with yourself and accepting what's in front of you, you know, embracing your imperfections. Because if somebody was actually perfect, they wouldn't have any vulnerabilities. If they had no vulnerabilities, you would have nothing to connect with them on.
Right.
So let's abandon this idea of let's abandon the idea of perfect. Let's just focus on progress. We'll all make progress and make progress until we die, but we don't need to be or do or accomplish something for love to be in our life.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I also love that that you're a man speaking about love. I think there's a huge shift right now just with men in general. I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening in the world and, you know, rocks being turned over, things being questioned, new definitions just across the board, not just with love and relationships. But I appreciate you creating this conversation about love, relationships, and you know, as a minority male, I can relate to you, but also being a wordsmith and putting it on paper and injecting it with art, right? So you're also kind of redefining what self-betterment can look like. Yes. You know? Yeah. And so, so thank you for all of that.
No, of course. I mean, as I said, and everything I do comes from me sucking at it. You know, like I was engaged and I ended the relationship. And I had you asked me the day I did it, why, I couldn't answer. Yeah. I just felt the anxiety. And then, you know, it took years for me to realize I wasn't breaking up with a person. I was breaking up with a version of myself in that relationship. But that was what sparked this book, because I was like, why do I suck at love? Why does everybody else seem so happy? Why is everybody else working and I suck? Yeah. Knowing that as an adult, I have a peaceful relationship with my parents. I have a peaceful relationship with my siblings. I have a peaceful relationship with my extended family and my friends. I have friends I've known since elementary school that I've never had a conflict with. So I knew that I was extremely privileged in the relationships I had, but I still felt void. I felt a void. And even when I ended that relationship, it was her that called my friends to tell them 2 weeks later and saying, I bet he never told you. And they're like, he didn't. And then them calling me and be like, you've been sitting, and this is during the pandemic, like, you've been sitting alone for 2 weeks, not telling anybody that you ended a 5-year relationship. And that was me realizing, like, oh, all my life to survive the way I thought, I built this fortress to protect myself. Sure. And now I realize it was a prison. And I wouldn't even tell my own friends that I ended a relationship because I was afraid of their judgment. I was afraid of them saying, you idiot, that's the best you were ever going to get, or what have you. And that wasn't what they said when it happened. And that in itself, and even last week, another really good friend of mine brought that back up. They said, you had broken up with that person for 3 months and I didn't know. And they go, and they internalized it like, I thought we were friends. And I looked at it as I just didn't want to burden anyone with my stuff. Yeah. Because that's what we're taught to do, is be small, don't exist. Right. The conscientiousness, especially children of immigrants. Yeah. Don't make your existence matter. Right. Everyone's got way too much happening. And then through this journey of this book, realizing that, no, that's not what it is. Don't deny people an opportunity to be there for you. Yes, we all have full lives and full plates, but the most important thing we have in our existence is our relationships. Yeah. And I want to be there for my sisters if she's having a bad day. I want to be there for people that I care about deeply. And that may require me to cancel a meeting or cancel something because I need to make space for that. So I think for me, creating this book was that journey of figuring out, like, wait a minute. I know I'm not lacking love, but why am I not feeling it? And I realized, okay, the breeze is there. My sales are closed. What's the work to open that sale? And it's like, oh, I have to start being okay with my imperfections and myself. I have to understand even simple things like people don't see, when they look at me, they don't see what I see when I look at me. Right, right. You know? And
so writing this book was actually therapeutic.
Yeah, right? I do all my work selfishly. Every book I've ever written is
for you first, kind of thing.
It's for me first, and it's I'm not a love expert. I'm not a clinical psychologist or anything like that. I am the kid at the front of the class who takes really good notes and shares them. That's me, and I'm still learning, and I'm still making mistakes. And as I said, I think the big promise in this book isn't you're gonna find a soulmate. I think the big promise in this book is you'll learn not to carry the weight.
I like that. Not about finding the soulmate, which, you know, all the Disney movies hang on,
Yeah.
right? The prince or whatever coming, princess or prince. But learning to carry the weight. Yeah. What a great message. Thank you. I think we should, it's a great period to end on. Making it not about the promise, but learning to carry when you say carry the weight, I think about the responsibility we have to sit at the table of love, right? The ante, which is learning to carry the weight.
And I think the other idea I had was like love isn't the glue that keeps people together. Love is the fuel that makes them work. You have to work. Like, you know, if you're in a relationship, any relationship, even your relationship with yourself, the most useful things that you do to take care of yourself, whether it's showering, brushing your teeth, they're all the least romantic, the most monotonous, and the most repetitive, but they're the most efficient.
Sure.
You know, you can't romanticize all of that. It's the same thing in a relationship.
The unsexy stuff you're saying.
The unsexy stuff. And it's not, I neglected you for 6 months, so now let me take you to Paris. You know, it's not these grand gestures. It's the day-to-day stuff. Yeah. It's the little things to make someone feel seen.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's energy and that's effort. And that may require you to sacrifice energy and effort in some other department of your life to make sure that you have time for that stuff. And it requires you to be really intentional.
Go pick this up. It's called How to Be Loved, and it's wide everywhere.
Amazon.
Right. Cool.
It's you know, audiobook. The Audible version is great, doing extremely well as well. And Barnes and Noble, anywhere you get books, anywhere around the world. Indigo in Canada, Waterstones in the UK.
Yeah.
Everywhere, yeah.
Humble the Poet. Well, thanks for hanging out,
Thanks so much for having me,
thanks for the conversation.
Appreciate you.
Yeah. Where can we find you?
At Humble the Poet everywhere, and humblethepoet.com. And if you can't find the book where you look for books, go to humblethepoet.com/love.
All right. Thank you for listening. Be well.